Hey everyone, it's Ryan from Arcade High back again with another Synthwave series tutorial, and this time we're talking about structure. It's Structure Day. I don't even remember what number of Synthwave tutorial this is, maybe 9 or 10, but structure is extremely important, especially as a new producer. I feel like I see this often. It goes hand in hand with composition, and if you saw our previous video, then you'll know that we are big proponents of composition over mixing, because mixing, ultimately people will forgive, while composition is what will keep them listening. Now, a huge part of composition, of course, is structure of the song itself. And there's a million different ways that you can structure your song, and it kind of all depends on the genre that you're doing. There are certain sort of, not rules, but guidelines when it comes to structure. And I'm going to go over some of those in this video here. And so, of course, as we always talk about on these videos, we're mostly talking about electronic, pop music, synthwave, retrowave, whatever you want to call it. That's the kind of sort of music that we make, so that's kind of where all this sort of stems from. But we'll be talking about a couple other different sort of structures of different songs that you can still implement into your synthwave track. And so I think really the important element of structure that everyone needs to remember is that it is your roadmap. You're the director of the song. The listener is being taken on a journey, and you were telling them where to go, how to feel at any given moment. And so you're using the parts of your song, your drums, your bass, your arpeggiated synth lines, your lead lines, the hook of your song, to kind of tell the listener, okay, we're moving into this section now. We are going lower energy. We're going to build to higher energy here. And it lets them kind of feel what you want to feel at any given moment. If you give them just a straight one energy or one speed, if you will, in a car the whole time, it's just going to feel like you're just sort of wandering or meandering, or that you don't really know what you're doing. You're just sort of going full speed ahead. Even tracks that are generally considered to be upbeat tracks will still have a part here and there that will kind of breathe. It's like conversation. If you're talking to someone and they're giving you a story, and I'm sure you've heard people do this, where they just ramble on constantly and they just move from one point to the next and they just don't breathe or don't stop or don't give any kind of pause to recognize that you're even listening to them, it can get kind of exhausting. And so that's really kind of the same in music. You want the song to take a breath, to breathe, to pause for a moment, even if it's for a short moment. And that's why when it comes to structures of like the classic pop song that you'll hear on the radio, that's why you have verses, choruses, bridges, and whatnot. It changes. It takes breaths. It actually will move up and down and back again. So how do you structure your track? It's all about tension and release, or high energy and low energy, whichever way you want to think about it. If you haven't checked out our video on adding energy to your track, I highly recommend doing this. It's going to go over 3 basic ways of adding energy to your track. But if you don't want to jump over there and watch that video, I'm going to go over some of those here. So there's a few different ways you can do it. So when it comes to adding or removing energy, and we'll say specifically adding energy, and then you do the opposite to remove energy. To add energy to your track, you can turn the pitch up higher, take a synth line and then bump it up an octave for the next part. That will add energy. If you have a vocal line moving into the chorus, if you're going up an octave or just singing higher notes, that will add energy to it. You can also up the rhythm of something. If you're doing something in 8th notes on, let's say, drums, maybe a hi-hat, and then you start adding 16th notes, that will add energy to that as well. Adding another part will be another thing that you can do to add energy. Maybe you're just adding another arpeggiated line. Maybe you're just adding a different sound that the listener hasn't heard yet in the track. Or you could also do something that I talked about in the previous video, where it's sort of like a tension and release, where you can kind of give the audience an expectation, or the listener an expectation of, let's say you're holding on a bass note and you're just holding on that single bass note for 8 measures, 16 measures, and then suddenly you change that bass note. Now that next part is going to have a sort of a totally different sound, because that bass note will interact with the synths to give it a whole new sort of chord structure, and it'll sound more interesting and different to the listener. That can also add energy as well. Now, a big thing when it comes to structuring is obviously adding or removing parts. If you're in your verse and you don't want that to be as energetic, maybe you don't have the drums playing there, or maybe you don't have the bass playing there. Or perhaps it's just one single synth as opposed to 2 or 3 synths playing. And then as you move into your chorus, you can add those synths back in, gives it more energy by adding those new parts, and then suddenly it now feels more energetic, and it feels different and more interesting to the listener. So let's go over some basic structures. I sort of broke down structures into sort of three main categories that at least we use that when we're thinking about structuring songs, and these might kind of give you a better visual as to what I'm talking about. So we're going to begin looking at structures here with pop. Now this is obviously the most common one that you're going to find in most music. Pretty much anything on the radio is going to have something very similar to this. And, like all of these videos, these are just tools for you to use. Don't think that you have to structure your song exactly like this one or any of the three that we're going to be talking about today. Think of them as sort of building blocks, because the most important thing that you can understand is what the structure of your track is. It needs to have some type of structure, and it's good to know exactly what that is. Now, the line at the top here is just sort of like a little line indicating the energy in and out. And, with pop, it's your standard verse, chorus, bridge, chorus type thing. So, you begin with the intro, move into the verse, which is usually like a lower to medium energy, move into your hook or the chorus of your song, however you want to call it, back into your verse, which will be the same or similar as your first one, back into your hook or the chorus, into a bridge, which will generally speaking be a lower energy. Sometimes it can be higher energy or keep up the energy from that previous hook, back into your final chorus or your hook, and then outro, and then lower that energy out. So you can see it's kind of like a little bit of a roller coaster, right? It's not just one straight line across. It kind of moves up and down throughout the track. And, this can be used in both vocal tracks or instrumental tracks. And I think that's a big thing that synthwave producers often miss, is even if your track is instrumental, you can still use this type of structure, that verse, chorus type of structure. Some pop songs will use pre-choruses or post-choruses, after. Another trick you can do is you can actually tease the hook or the chorus immediately, inside of your intro or immediately after your intro before the first verse comes in. That's a good trick to use, and that oftentimes pop music will use. And really just a good thing to do in general is just to reverse engineer your favorite tracks, whether it's synthwave stuff, whether it's popular stuff on the radio. Listen to those songs and listen to how those are structured. Maybe you can't necessarily distinguish exactly what, the producer was trying to convey when it comes to like their specific verse or chorus or whatever. But generally speaking, you can, especially when it comes to the choruses. It's usually the highest energy. It's usually the catchiest part. It's usually pretty obvious when something goes into the chorus because it also repeats 2 or 3 times throughout the song. So the second style or structure we're going to look at is going to be the banger track. This is like the EDM track. It's most common found in there. Obviously, this uses the trick of doing like the big build and then the drop, if you will, which is into your hook or your chorus. So it begins with an intro, build up, and then like a pre-hook, which is like the big EDM style build up, goes into the hook or the drop, and then usually it'll have like a bridge in the middle that it'll kind of do its own thing, like a lower energy, and then back into building up again for a pre-hook, and then into the drop again, and then an outro. Now, once again, not every single EDM song is going to have this exact structure, and you might be hard pressed to find an EDM song that has this exact structure, but this is kind of generally speaking what we use if we're trying to build a track that's a bit more of that sort of EDM or kind of banger style, where we're trying to build that tension up and then kind of drop it into the chorus and whatnot. We have a song off of our new album coming out later this year. It's actually the first song on the album that actually uses pretty much exactly this structure. Now, in this structure, the use of rhythm in both the drums and the synths or instruments is super important, because that's what allows the energy to create tension between the hooks. So obviously, during your build-up and your pre-hook, you're going to start to really build the energy by adding drums and faster drum rhythms and whatnot up until that hook, and then you can kind of drop it down and then ease off the tension, but still build all the synths into that main hook. I mean, you can really listen to any kind of EDM style track with this to kind of understand that concept. Now, this can still be used in synthwave tracks. Don't think you have to make an EDM, dance club song. You can still use this as a general building blocks for your synthwave track if you wanted to. This is all about structure and not sound or tone. That's kind of a big thing that I want to mention here, is that these are just structures. They are not necessarily, specific to any one genre. Even though it's found in EDM a lot, it doesn't have to be an EDM style dance, banger track. And then the final one would be like a new disco style track, where this one is pretty unique and this is pretty loose when it comes to the structure, but I did my best to kind of try to explain it in that a new disco structure, as you can see on that energy line, it does kind of keep one energy, but it does go up and down a little bit. So generally, a new disco structure will have one main hook, which is kind of shown as part A on the blocks there. And then that will repeat throughout most of the tracks. If you listen to something like Lifelike, they will do this kind of structure often. Like they do that kind of new disco style where that one single synth part or kind of hook will repeat a lot. And then they might bring in a part B that will go over top of that part A. And then, it's possible that part A, that main hook, will play throughout almost all of the track. And then usually you'll have like a filtered down or like a bridge part, toward the end that will probably take that part A out and then kind of build back up to end with that main hook again. That kind of breaks up the repetition of the song. And, songs with this structure, they don't typically have a distinct apex of energy, and they just sort of oftentimes feel like they're constantly building. And this is arguably the trickiest structure to hold listeners' attention, but this is a perfect structure for the dance floor because it does kind of keep that sort of energy throughout and can kind of keep people dancing on the floor, essentially. Another example of this type of new disco structure, which is sort of like a side sister of it, would be something like an artist like Power Glove, where they will often do something similar to this, where you may not necessarily, depending on the track, necessarily hear like a distinct chorus. Oftentimes they'll use their bass line or their bass part as sort of that part A, that main hook, and that kind of repeats out through most of the song. And it might change a little bit here and there or alter that bass rhythm and whatnot, but it sort of keeps, for the most part, that kind of consistent sort of tension and kind of build, and then every so often will drop out into filter parts and whatnot. Another good example of this, I would say, would be the band Oliver. Their song Automatic would be another example of this sort of new disco style structure. Not new disco style song. I wouldn't call Oliver Automatic or Power Glove new disco, but the structure, I would say, is sort of a similar thing where it's kind of keeping this tension or constantly kind of building this tension and then pulling back with some filter parts and then building back up again, as opposed to doing your standard like verse chorus type part. All right, so let's take a look at one of our tracks. This is We Were Titans off of our album New Impressions from 2019. This is the original project, and it has some missing plugins and some wonky mixing things in here. So if this doesn't quite sound exactly like the original, that's why. But let's just look at like the basic structure that we have here, which essentially acts, and I'll play a little bit of this, but essentially we have our intro, which is also sort of our verse one as well through here. So it's kind of intro, sort of verse one. And then we have a build up, which is kind of a pre-chorus here. And that kind of takes some notes from sort of the EDM structure a little bit, right? When you'll hear it, builds up and it drops here into the chorus all the way to here where we do a post-chorus, then into verse 2 right here, then back to a pre-chorus build similar to the first one, drops again, actually has a little bit of a part here that changes things up, which you'll hear, and then back into the chorus through here. You can kind of see these chunks, like you can see this is pretty much the same as this, because those are choruses. And the hook only plays twice in this song. Then it has a bridge, which keeps the energy up, and then a second part of the bridge, and then into the outro, which drops the energy. So let's just play a little bit of this. so you can kind of hear how the energy, starts a little low and then drops even lower and then builds up to the big energy here in the chorus. And then has a little bit of a post-chorus to kind of bring us back down into the next verse. And then this build up here has an extra little bit right before the chorus that you'll kind of hear gives it a little bit of interesting flavor. And so that little drop there just gives it a little bit of something different for the listener as opposed to here. And that's always kind of the thing is, even when you're doing, if you're looking at your structure with like verse, chorus type of thing, which technically this has, right? It has verse here, verse here, chorus here. We're still adding in new things, interesting things to make each one a little bit different. Now, choruses can, generally speaking, kind of play the same thing and get away with it. But verses, you want to add some different elements. So like the verse here is a little bit different than this one here. It removes that arpeggiator and then adds some claps to kind of build up there. Even just little small things can, make all the difference. And then the final one I wanted to look at is Coastline off of our Heatwave EP from 2014. I lost the original project, I apologize, but I brought in the master here. And you can see this essentially it begins at least as that EDM structure, where it just has the intro, a build up, and then immediately into a pre-chorus, and then it drops into the chorus here. Then you kind of have like a post-chorus and a verse, and then pre-chorus, chorus again, and then a bridge, which this verse 3 I put here is sort of an extension of the bridge if you listen to the song all the way through, and then just an outro where it just lowers the energy slowly to the end of the song. But I'll just play this opening thing, and you can hear how this is technically just that EDM structure of sort of a constant build-up, but not like a very clear verse 1, and it goes right into that chorus. And then you have sort of like a verse, 2 here. So that goes to kind of show you that, when you're looking at your structure, it doesn't have to be an EDM track to use sort of that EDM structure of you're just taking that first minute or so to build up that first chorus. It can be a synthwave track or whatever genre you're writing in. And that's going to be about it. So I hope this was somewhat useful. I know it's kind of a lot to take in, and I really did just sort of scratch the surface of structure and how you can use structure in your songs. But until next time, subscribe if you're enjoying the videos, leave a like or a comment. Let me know what your favorite structure is, or maybe what songs have a good structure that you really love, or maybe a unique structure that's very different from other tracks. And until next time, stay rad.